What happens when our expectations are not met? When the reality of the situation is nowhere near what we expected? Years ago, it was going to be our first full summer in Houston. We didn't like the partial summer that we experienced. And Nathaniel, my son's hair was getting long, and I decided that I don't want to deal with it. We're going to shave it off. So for a week, I prepped him. Nathaniel, we're going to shave your head off. You're going to have no hair, none. It's going to be cool. It's going to be easy. And then when you get ready in the morning, you don't have to worry about it. You just get up and go. So every day. And he loves going to the barber. So I'm like, the barber's going to run the razor all up your hair, and it's just going to be nice. And like, he's excited. And I'm telling him, you're going to have no hair. Your head's going to be shaved. Everything's going to be good. And so we get to the barber, and he sits, and he says to the barber, I'm going to shave my head. I'm going to like it. It's going to be cool. And I'm like, yes. So we sit there, and the barber is going, just running the razor, and he's excited about all the hair that is around him. He's like, so much hair. And I'll never forget this. The barber said, we're done. Do you want to see? And he goes, yes. And she turns the chair around, and Nathaniel sees the mirror, and he goes, no. 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 And I was like, oh, no. Like, I was excited. And so the sheer disappointment was written on his face the way I've never seen it and haven't seen that expression since. So I wonder what happens when the things that we expect doesn't come to the way we expect it. And this entire week is about expectations that aren't met. Because what happens when the God you expect, the God that you want, the God that you need shows up and is not who you expected? Because the disciples had different expectations of their Messiah. They thought that their Messiah was going to come and lead a revolution. He was going to be a mighty warrior. He was going to overthrow the oppressive Roman Empire, and he was going to set himself up as king and restore the kingdom of Israel. That's why the disciples always fought with one another. Who's the greatest? No, I'm going to be the greatest, because whoever is the greatest is going to be the right-hand man. That's why we have James and John's mom coming up to Jesus and says, hey, Jesus, when you get into power, remember my boys. Let one hand and the other sit on your left hand. Jesus was supposed to be the one who comes and takes down the crosses that were littered throughout Jerusalem as a reminder of punishment and death. In fact, I bet some of them were thinking, you know what, when we come into power, we should hang the Romans and use their own instruments to intimidate them. But the Jesus that they got was not so aggressive. He didn't talk about war as much. In fact, there was no talk about violence. Turn the other cheek when someone strikes you. Give the person who sues you for your shirt, give them your cloak. Walk the extra mile with a Roman soldier. This Jesus, who was supposed to destroy the cross, was never supposed to die on one. And so when he was arrested and he was sentenced to death, they all deserted him because they had no idea what to do. In fact, one of my favorite awkward moments of the gospel is when Jesus was going to get arrested. And the guys come, and it's according to Luke. And when they came to arrest Jesus, a disciple, Luke doesn't name him, but I like to say it's Peter, because did you hear, Peter, if you're going to wash my feet, not my feet, my hand and my head also. And Jesus like, oh, Peter. Peter takes the sword, cuts off the disciple's ear. Cuts off the Roman soldier's ear. And I could just imagine this moment is tense. Everyone's ready to fight. Like, the Romans, they have one of the guys is missing his ears and bleeding all over the place, and the disciples have 2 swords among the 12 of them, and they're just, they're ready to fight. And what does Jesus do? He picks up the ear and places it right back on the Roman soldier's head, and the ear's healed. That probably dissipated any fighting spirit. Like, could you imagine, you're ready to fight, and he does that, and you're like, okay. So they're all just staying there, staring at each other. What's next? I guess that's not going to happen. But are we that different today, some 2,000 odd years later? we still want a God who is powerful, a God who will smite those who we don't like. We want a God who is mighty and warrior-like. And there's a meme of this Jesus who is buff and he breaks himself off the cross. Like, that's the kind of God many of us want. We want this God to rule with an iron fist. Yet tonight shows us that we get a God who comes and serves with a towel and a basin. What does that mean for us as people who are gathered here today, at home or here? We declare, I assume, that we are Christians and therefore we follow Jesus. And if Jesus, as our leader, doesn't rule with an iron fist, but instead comes with a towel and a basin and washes his friends' feet, let's be real, washes his subordinates' feet, what's the implication on us then? What are we called to do? If our model does that, then what is our call? Today, in the afternoon, I stopped by St. Andrews to bother Courtney, which I love to do. And I was telling her, and Debbie was there, that I don't want to wash feet. Why is this a thing? I mean, yeah, Jesus did it, but why do I? And the thing is, feet, unless you have a foot fetish, and I'm not judging, but feet represents some sort of vulnerability. Some of us don't have the best looking feet because of the shoes that society makes us wear. Some of us, and I won't mention who, but my son, have really feet that smells really bad, and you wonder how something so small can smell. And to have someone stare at our feet is not a desirable thing. To have someone touch our feet is not a desirable thing, especially if you're ticklish. It might be one thing to go to get a pedicure, pedicure's feet, pedicure, because you're expecting it, but to come at church and it's like, I've been wearing the same shoes all day. Having our feet washed puts us in a state of vulnerability that I kind of bristle at. But also, those who wash feet are in a state of powerlessness. Because you're on your knees and if there's any contact, you're looking up. There is a clear power dynamic of one who is washing the feet and the one who's get their feet washed. There's a clear dynamic of one who's cleaning your shoes while you have them on and one who is having their shoes cleaned. So Jesus comes start a revolution. But this revolution isn't based upon iron fist. It's not based upon weapons. It's not based upon earthly power and earthly might and earthly forces and the strength that we can gather and muster up. Jesus' revolution begins with the first verse of the passage you read is my favorite line of this entire story. Having loved his own who are in the world, he loved them to the end. Love is the foundation of our journey. Jesus modeled vulnerability and powerlessness. The Son of God, the 80-degree angle, I don't know, the corner of the Trinity, Jesus himself, abdicated power and took on a role of a servant and washed the feet of those who were to serve him. And he washed all 12 sets of feet. He didn't look at Judas and said, I know what you're going to do. You can wash your own feet. He washed every single one of their feet with the same love. Because having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. And so, as you come forward, if you dare, to have your feet washed, embrace that moment of vulnerability. Because vulnerability is not weakness. That's where true courage comes from. And then, when it's your turn to wash the next person's feet, remember the heart of the servant. We are not here to rule. We are not here to control. We are not here to judge. But we're simply here to serve in love. If Jesus was able to wash the feet of his disciples, what are we called to do?